3 houses in new developments could be set aside for first-time buyers, according to legislation drafted by Fianna Fáil and due to be brought before the Dáil tomorrow. The bill is aimed at preventing so-called cuckoo funds from crowding out first-time buyers in cities. But how will it work and how much difference could it make? We're going to hear from Darragh O'Brien, who's Fianna Fáil TD for Fingal and the party's spokesperson on housing, planning and local government in a moment. But first I'm joined by Dr Lorcan Sir, Senior Lecturer in Housing at the Technological University of Dublin. Now, Lorcan, from what we've read of this bill so far, Fianna Fáil's plan is to give local authorities the power to earmark a percentage of zoned land for first-time buyers. What's your expert opinion of that proposal?
Good evening, Mary. I think there's some, like most proposals, there's some quite good and interesting points about it, and then there's some flaws that probably need to be ironed out. So I would suggest that, getting in ahead of the cuckoo funds to help people buy properties, instead of these funds coming in, not a bad idea at all, really. But the biggest problem with people swooping in on new developments to buy them isn't really cuckoo funds, it's the state itself. And last year, the state bought nearly 1 in 5 of all houses that came onto the market, excluding council houses and one-off houses, which was much more than many of the cuckoo funds. So it's the state I'd be looking at there rather than the cuckoo funds. The other interesting thing about this is, like, at the back of it all is the promotion of home ownership. And that's quite a good thing, I think, because there's a narrative now from government that we should all be kind of Europeanising ourselves and looking forward to renting forever and in our apartments and things like that. But, the reality is that, with 67.6% with renting, we've been sent down a road of European renting without being given the security of tenure or the affordability that you get in Europe. So they're two things that I'd be supportive of. The problem with this, and I'm sure Darragh will address it in a minute, but the problem with this is that it's very much dependent on the market, which is like Part 5. So for the listeners, Part 5 was where developers have to hand over 10%. It used to be 20%, but 10% the new housing to the state. And the problem is, in the good times, that's great, you're getting 10% of a lot of housing, but in the bad times, the Part 5 drives up as the new housing drives up. And we saw that a few years ago when we ended up with something like 78 new houses, or Part 5 houses one year, which was really, really poor. And the problem is this, in turn, is dependent on developers, developing housing. And the problem is what happens when the market turns or when it dries up. We end up with no housing coming because of that. And then finally, just one more thing to Darragh put on this there, is, will these require a government subsidy, either directly or indirectly, indirectly like via maybe a cross subsidy from other purchasers in development. The other 70%, will something have to be added to the sales price of their houses in order to subsidise possibly the cheaper ones, and I hope there will be cheaper ones for the first-time buyers.
Lots of points raised there, Lorcan. Let's go to Darragh O'Brien. Darragh O'Brien, tell us about this legislation and how, bearing in mind what Lorcan has said there, explain to us what you hope to achieve.
Yeah, certainly. Lorcan makes a few very valid points, and actually I might just address them by way of explaining it. Firstly, this is published in the context that first-time buyers are being squeezed out of the market, and they're being squeezed out twofold: one, by investor funds on the one side, and two, as Lorcan correctly says, by the state. Last year, 18,000 homes were built there or thereabouts, and about 6,000 of them were either bought by cuckoo funds or the state. Now, you don't mind the state buying homes because people will be housed in them, but they're actually competing with first-time buyers in the market. If you had additional stock, and Fianna Fáil want the state to build homes, that's the first thing. Secondly, what really relates to is the whole area of affordable purchase. This would be in addition to the affordable purchase scheme that we have actually published. And the affordable purchase scheme that we published would be predominantly affordable homes built on state-owned land. So this is in addition to that. And really what we're trying to address is exactly what Lorcan is saying, is that home ownership is slipping away from a whole generation of people. We're now below the EU average in home ownership, down to about 67%, the lowest rate in 50 years, behind the EU, when countries that are referred to as a model and are held up, like Germany and Austria, are actually home ownership levels are increasing. So what we're trying to do is try to help people. I conclude in this, Mary, the people that I meet all the time who are despairing, stuck in a rip-off rental market, who can't actually raise enough for their deposit, and could actually, if they were able to buy something, well, it would save about half of what they're paying in rent.
But Darragh O'Brien, what is this going to do for affordability? Builders could be putting up 5 houses for €1 million. That's no benefit to young families.
That was the answer that came back from government. No, that's not at all what we're talking about. They know that. You will have some estates, and I talk, the area that I represent, Dublin Fingal, which is a growth area and with the youngest constituency in the country. We have estates that where developers will pitch the homes at a first-time buyer, and that is fine. So in those instances, that's why in my bill it says the local authority can vary that between 0 and 30%. What we're looking for is to stop this bulk buying of existing developments. And that is a major, major problem. I could give you 20 or 30 different examples all across Dublin at the moment. And we have a concentration now of investor properties and cuckoo funds in whole developments being owned by them. Now, whilst we need investors in the market and they should be a proportion of it, they shouldn't own it. And what we're going to have in future, if we don't arrest this, is we will have whole towns and areas of Dublin, Cork, Galway, Waterford, etc., owned by pension funds. And that's not the vision that we have. We believe that home ownership is a decent and honest aspiration for people to have, and one that should be supported by the state.
In order for your proposal to work, there are many elements, but one of them would be, would you not require a system that would need to track who's buying?
No, again, no. You would actually need, like anything, and like when one is applying for a first-time buyer's grant, the Rebuilding Ireland, the Help to Buy grant that we fought very hard to keep in the last budget. Someone is making a declaration that they're a first-time buyer. This idea that you would have to track the whole system is incorrect. This is an addition, by the way, to building on state-owned land. And this is actually what it's trying to do, is to give the first-time buyers a break. Because I know that your listeners who have 30 and 40-year-old sons and daughters living at home, 3 generations living in the one house, because they can't afford the rent, they're trying to put together money for a deposit, and home ownership is running away from them. And this hasn't just happened, by the way. These investor funds and PRS were invited in by the Fine Gael government. This is a strategy to move people towards the private rental market, or as Owen Murphy keeps referring to, a European model. Okay. Now, I know from talking to people that the major preference for most people is the chance to own their own home, and then the state must pick up the rest by building proper and decent public housing.
But in the meantime, the state is in there, and I think Lorcan Sir has said, like a magpie at the moment. As he said, taking things like a magpie, taking things off other people, buying up the houses that you want to make available to first-time buyers. And the state is not building at the level you're talking about. So in the meantime, will the first-time buyer not still be in competition with the state for every house that goes up in their price bracket?
Well, Mary, that is absolutely a very fair comment, because that is one of the major problems, is that the state is going in like a magpie and taking homes from other people. Now, what the state will argue, and with some justification, is they're housing people who need housing. But what we haven't seen from this government is we need to drastically increase the houses that we build as a state, that we don't need to be going in buying full developments.
That's a different element to the proposal.
No, Mary, it's not actually, with respect, and I tell you why it's not. That's why I have proposed upping the discretionary cap to allow local authorities to tender for their own developments, up to developments of 40 and 50 homes, to let the local authorities get back out there and build. So until we do that, the state will continue to compete for part of the market. Okay. That's not where we should be at. That's what I'm saying.
A final comment from you, Lorcan Sir, on what you've heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting proposal. I would definitely agree with allowing local authorities, giving them their head and letting them off to build. I think that's what needs to happen. The big cultural shift that's happening underneath our very noses, and very few people are even discussing it, is the whole shift, the proportion of people who are renting at the moment and who would be maybe stuck in renting for life. And it's just not financially, economically possible to be retired and renting in Ireland for the vast majority of people. So that we need to wake up to that kind of that shift.
Lorcan Sir, Darragh O'Brien, thank you both for joining us.